The VLGA is offering a special councillor professional development intensive series. Partner with 3 other councils and save more than 50% off the minimum cost of completing all 13 modules in Year 1. The intensives will be held over 3 days. They're cost effective, time efficient and promote the benefits of peer-to-peer and face-to-face learning. In addition to the intensives and in recognition that every council has different needs, the VLGA also offers bespoke training options, both online and in person. A faculty of facilitators will work with you to customise a program that responds directly to the unique professional development needs of your council. To find out more, head to www.vlga.org.au. Hello and welcome to the Well-Travelled Executive Series, where we delve into the journeys of remarkable leaders in local government. The series is part of the Local Government News Roundup podcast family, brought to you by the Victorian Local Governance Association. And today I'm thrilled to have Michael Tudball with me, a distinguished figure in Victorian local government, with a career spanning from finance to becoming a council CEO. Michael's insights into community development and economic growth are sure to inspire. Let's dive into his fascinating story and uncover some of the lessons he's learned along the way on the Well-Travelled Executive Series. Michael Tudball, today's guest, has worked at just about every council there is in Victoria. I'm only exaggerating slightly, and he's having some well-earned downtime after recently finishing up as the interim CEO at Darebin City Council. Michael Tudball, great to have you here.
G'day, Chris, and thanks for having me. We'll probably talk about it. The only place I haven't been is Gippsland, but I've been the rest of the state, so I've been around a little bit.
Well, there's still time for that, isn't there? Because your list of commitments on LinkedIn just seems to get longer by the day. And I want to go through some of that with you, Michael. Thanks for coming along for a chat. You're, I think I'm right in saying, one of those rare members of an exclusive club where you've been a councillor and a mayor before ultimately becoming a council CEO. Am I right?
Yes, correct, Chris. And I think the only other one in the club, and we keep talking about this, is Liana Thompson.
Of course.
Who was, of course, mayor at Port Phillip and of course, has been a CEO. So, yeah, I have experienced both sides of the bench, so to speak.
Yeah. So unique in Victoria, not so much Australia-wide. There's a few others out there that have done that. But just take us back to the start of your involvement in local government. Was it as a councillor?
No, it wasn't actually. It was an independent member of the Audit and Risk Committee at Moorabool Shire. So
right.
My shire. So I live in Bacchus Marsh and ended up being a councillor at Moorabool. But I was approached by the director of finance at the time and said, "We're looking for someone a bit local. Would you like to come to the Audit and Risk Committee?" I said, "Oh, yeah, why not?" So that was my first. So I was first elected in 2004. So the Audit and Risk Committee would have been about 2000, I reckon.
So what was your professional experience at the time for someone to tap you on the shoulder for an Audit and Risk Committee?
So predominantly finance and administration. So started life in the bank. So I was in what was then the Commercial Banking Corporation, which was CBC, that became Westpac. So finance to start with, and then travelled around a little bit in a couple of roles after the banking. Was with the CFA, so the Country Fire Authority, and I was a finance and administration manager. So always had a bent for the figures and all that type of stuff. Always interested in local community, and the Director of Finance at Moorabool knew of me and thought, oh, you're someone who's got a bit of a background there and also a professional background, so you might be good. And I thoroughly enjoyed my time on the Audit and Risk. I think I was there until I was elected onto council, and then I became, of course, the councillor representative on the Audit and Risk Committee. So I've had a few audit and risks in my day.
I'll bet. What did you know about local government before that audit committee involvement?
Nothing, and I'd have to say that because people ask you this all the time about, what prepares you for local government. I'm not sure much does.
Yeah.
And even the Audit and Risk Committee, you get to see some components of it, but you don't get to see the council decision making. You do get to interact with a couple of councillors, but more intimately with the executive. And obviously, back in the 2000s, risk was just sort of starting to come through. It was a lot finance. And then risk started to really get there. And in my management consultancy that I ran for about 10 years, risk and quality management systems were the two areas I focused. So that sort of got my interest into that area. And then it was a community project that got me interested in council. Well, it didn't even get me interested in council. And just across the way from where we live, Mattingley Park in Bacchus Marsh, we built one of those adventure playgrounds. So we had 2,500 volunteers over 4 days that built this brand new playground that's still sitting there today, 20 years later. And it was an amazing project and an amazing community outcome. And it just so happened the following year, so we finished in the October, the next October were council elections. And someone said, you should run. And I said, what would I want to do that for, really? So I just put my name down, didn't do anything, didn't do any marketing, didn't do whatever. And as they say, the rest was history. So in 2004, got elected first term on Mirrabel Council. That we were the first 8 councils that went fixed 4-year terms. Then the following year, the next all did fixed 4-year terms.
Yes, I thought it must have been around that time when those changes happened. And then you did 2 terms, didn't you, including 1 term as mayor?
1 term as mayor, yep. So 2004 to 2012, and in 2008, when I was re-elected, the council obviously showed confidence in me and elected me as mayor, which was amongst, besides, as you say, marriage and kids and all those important milestones in life, got to be the best year of my life, Chris, really. Thoroughly enjoyed being the mayor. Had some challenges along the way with developments and all the things that you do in local government, but really enjoyed it, and particularly enjoyed getting out and about in the rest of the community. You do get a bit centric, and we were in wards back then. So Bacchus Marsh had 4 councillors and only 3 right across the rest of the municipality, so the main centre in Bacchus Marsh. So it was really nice to get out and about, particularly up to the west further around the red dirt country, closer to Ballarat, and of course Balan being the other major centre. So really enjoyed it, interacting with the community, and we did some really good things. And it's nice to sit here today and see some of the things that are being delivered now. That and we talk about that. We started this 20 years ago, and it's finally got there.
That would be very satisfying. So you talk about that term as mayor very fondly, but it was a oncer. Was that by choice? And I notice after the end of that term of council, you didn't come back.
Yeah. Yes, it was my choice. And again, I've spoken to a number, including most recently at my most recent appointment, about when you choose to go or when the community chooses for you to go. And I must say it's a much easier transition when it's your choice, and that's probably the same in all roles in life. Yeah. But I got an interest in the state government, and particularly community development, after the playground project. And very long story short, but ended up working for the Department for Victorian Communities, then the Department of Planning and Community Development in a transition in a broker role, a community broker role it was. And I had a lot to do with local government, and particularly back in the day, David Turnbull, CEO at Whittlesea, he was just transitioning from Graham to David as the new CEO, and Neville Smith and then Kel Torrey at Melton. So I had a lot to do with them. And I thought, I reckon I could work in this sector. I reckon it'd be all right. So then I got a job in 2011, 12. I got a role at Kel rang me while I was still in the state government and said, "Hey, listen, how would you like a role here?" So I ended up getting a role at Melton to manage all their growth areas, and being a councillor next door and working in council 12 kilometres away. You can live and breathe local government for so long, Chris, but
so there is a limit.
There's absolutely a limit. And I thought 8 years. The other thing that came into consideration were the fixed 4-year terms, which I'm a big supporter of. But then that tells you. So I had to commit to 12 years. Then that would have been the 3rd term. And I said, no, I've got a career. I had a young family, a mortgage, all the things that you do. And council, whilst it paid better and pays better now as a council law than what it ever did. It's clearly not a full-time job. And I actually, when I was mayor, I went back to 3 days a week work so I could dedicate 2 days to the mayoralty. But then thought, no, I've done my time. And I also believe when your time's up, your time's up.
So you've sort of answered, or you've partly answered the question I was coming to next, which was how you got into this economic development stream. Because when you look through your LinkedIn history, a lot of economic development in your profile, and that was a big focus of your role at Melton, ultimately, wasn't it? Which is when our paths first crossed.
It certainly was. You were down at Hobson's Bay. And we did a lot of advocacy and economic development and the growth in the West. And we'd always said, and you were one of these as well, Chris, but all the Western councils really were, the Southeast was going to fill up. And the Caseys and Cardinia continued to grow and expand, and good on them for what they've done down there. The West was always going to have its time. So having a sustainable economic base, particularly in Melton, and whilst I was in government with Whittlesea, but I also worked with Wyndham and the others, Melton really got my interest with the development that was going on, the opportunities with development. So I worked with many developers, including the Delphins back then Lendleases, and the opportunities of what they could do in communities and leave a lasting legacy, not just businesses, but the infrastructure to support the business. And I have great pleasure getting on the Ballarat V-Line train from Bacchus Marsh to go to Melbourne and go through 2 extra stations now, one of which is Cobblebank, which was called Toolan back in the day. And we worked with PTV, the government, everyone, to get that station up, and it's amazing to see it now. So the infrastructure to support that development. We also had a business incubator called the Western Base, the Western Business Accelerator and Centre for Excellence, which we got federal government funding for. It was sitting in a paddock all on its own, just diagonally opposite where the now Cobblebank station is.
I remember it well.
It's a whole town centre. It's a whole town centre there now, Chris. Yeah, you were still in your role down at Hobson's Bay as the CEO, and there's houses there. There's schools. There's Luke Shannon, a former director from Melton. He's got this wonderful pavilion and ground at the back of it. It's not named after him, but we called it the Luke Shannon Oval and Pavilion because, it was a really progressive time for Melton. And people say, at the time that Melton and the western suburbs never got a lot of investment. If you look back historically, though, I think we've done okay. We could always do better. And, of course, our paths crossed at Lead West, which was the advocacy body for the West. That's still in some kind of an existence at the moment, I think. Haven't had a lot to do with it, of course. But that economic development and advocacy, and the advocacy wasn't about, and I said this to council laws particularly a lot, it's the last thing you want to do is write a letter to an MP or a minister or the Premier. You've got to do all that work beforehand. Then you can back it up with a letter later on. It's sort of the last thing. If your letter's your only point of advocacy, you know the response you're going to get. It's going to go to a bureaucrat. They're going to craft a response. The minister will sign it and will say thanks, but no thanks. So it really got my interest up, particularly in Melton. I've got to say the crew that we had there, councillors and staff, we did really good stuff there in the 4 years, and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Some good communications and advocacy advice there for new players if they're listening. Thank you, Michael. You talk about the investment in the West. Yes, there's been a lot of investment. There's needed to be. I guess the issue's always been it's playing catch up, isn't it? From when you compare it to the eastern part of Melbourne, which has had a lot more investment over time.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's a combination of things. Obviously, developers were down there a lot before the West, and the West did smaller developments, did a lot of infill in places that you've been.
And it was very industrialised, of course, too, which created its own issues, didn't it?
Exactly, but you don't get a lot of investment in the infrastructure for that. They might do an entrance or an exit off the main road or whatever, but when you've got the greenfields development, and I absolutely get why we're doing infield and greenfields now, but the West was right behind the 8 ball, and even when the charges came in, the developer charges like the growth areas infrastructure charge and all that, we never got a fair share of those back in the day because of the draw down to the southeast, particularly what it needed. So we're still playing catch up there, but again, if you go back to the advocacy and having a really coordinated approach, the Western Highway Action Committee is one that started well before I was even on Moorabool Council. We used to call them the Whackers, WHAC.
Yeah.
Well, that did the Deer Park bypass. That's done the duplication. It's still going further west now up through Ararat and Stawell, and ultimately was to deliver duplication to the border. And then, of course, if you listen to traffic reports any morning, Monday to Friday, the big hold-ups between basically Melton and Caroline Springs, and that's the at-grade entries off those main roads now. So it's been announced as far as the federal government election went, so that'll be done next. So I think you've just got to give things time, and good things come to those who wait, is what an important person said to me once.
Indeed. So I want to come to your CEO career, but before I do that, around that time, you got yourself on the board of the CFA, and I noticed that was a fairly long-term experience for you, about 13 years, if I'm not mistaken. How do you look back on that time? Because it didn't end well, did it?
It certainly did not. So a passionate CFA volunteer, 45 years as a volunteer, predominantly here in Bacchus Marsh, but also in a little rural brigade, Strathcalla, when I was up in Hamilton as the CEO up there. I joined the rural brigade up there. But I've always had an interest in governance, clearly, with council roles and all that type of stuff, and got the opportunity to apply for the CFA board. And at this point in time, I think I'm the longest serving board member historically on CFA, 13 years. And again, my choice to finish that one. I'd moved to Hamilton for my next role. I could have stayed on, but I think a CEO gig, you've got to give it 100%. You're living, we uprooted from Bacchus Marsh and went to Hamilton. And I think you've got to give it 100%. And first CEO gig back in 2016 as well. So finished up in the middle of 2016 with CFA, but not the way we would have liked, I guess. We did some amazing things in CFA. Protection for firefighters, rollover protection in trucks. We had some tragedies during that time, the Linton fires, and of course we've had Black Saturday and all those ones through that time as well. But we were unceremoniously dumped by the then Labor government. James Molino was our Minister for Police and Emergency Services, and I got on very well with James when he was in government, as we did with all of our ministers over the time. But there was an enterprise agreement that was up for negotiation. We had a particular stance, the United Firefighters Union, and then ultimately the government had a different stance, and they gave us until 4 o'clock on a Friday to either agree or not, and we said not, and at 4:05 we all received a letter to say our services were no longer required. Gosh. But I hold no grudge on that, Chris. It's part of what you do. It's the things you go through. It just, it changed the face of now Fire Rescue Victoria and CFA. But we had a part of that, and hopefully it's all going really well. I'm just a volunteer now, and I don't even get on the back of a truck much anymore. But it's good to see that you've made some influence in the time that you've been there in a whole range of things that we did.
As you say, you hold no grudge. With the benefit of time, looking back on that period, is there anything you would have done differently?
I think if we could have, and it's a bit hard, you do rely on the chair of your board a lot to do stuff. And we had some outstanding chairs, some amazing. All of them in my time were outstanding chairs. Most recently, and in that time, it was Kerry Murphy, and Kerry had a long history. Most of us knew him through Regional Development Victoria. He was the first CEO of RDB. Kerry unfortunately passed away just a few weeks ago, and I did part of the eulogy at his funeral. But I think if we had been able to have more honest face-to-face with the union and the key bureaucrats, potentially the minister, I don't know. I know ultimately they'll make a decision, but the key bureaucrats to try and navigate a way through. And unfortunately, when your poles apart, when you've got one that wants this and the other one that wants almost the exact opposite, we always wanted what was best for our people, best for our firefighters. I think, to be honest, we're paying for it now through some things that are happening. The fire services levy that's out and about at the moment, it is funding a lot, and I think ultimately it's unsustainable. I think we should look at how we did it. It probably needs a cap, a bit like maybe another sector has, like local government.
Yes. All right.
That's very proud of my time, Chris. Yeah.
Okay. That's an interesting reflection, though. Thank you. So we're at the point there where you took on your first CEO role, as you mentioned, out at Southern Grampians Shire. What was the motivation for stepping up to that level? Was that a long-held ambition?
No, never.
No?
I never aspired, never thought. I thought, number one, I thought I'd be in Bacchus Marsh for the rest of my life. I've moved 5 times in my life and only once out of Bacchus Marsh, and that was to Hamilton, to Southern Grampians, Chris. But it was a bit of an attraction. I did get a phone call from the recruiter at the day, and I remember it clearly because we were over at Adelaide at the Tour Down Under. So it was mid to late January. As you know, I like my cycling. And they said, just in case you're interested, no, you've got a bit of a tie, and the recruiter knew I had a tie in Hamilton. So Vicky, my wife, she was born in Hamilton, and the family farm is just in at the base of the Grampians near Dunkeld. And I thought, that'd be all right. I was a manager level at Melton, so another thing that is not that common is jumping from a manager, so third level, to a CEO. So I drove up to Hamilton that day, and again, I'll never forget that. I had a coffee in the Botanic Gardens. We'd been up to Hamilton a lot over the years, and went to the interview, and there you have it. Next thing you know, they rang me and they said, would you like the job? And we jumped at it. It was a big thing to move from our family in Bacchus Marsh up to Hamilton. It's only 2 3/4 hours away, but the timing was just right for everything. And again, besides the mayoralty and being a councillor, next best job I had was CEO of Southern Grampians. It's just, I enjoyed every minute of it, even though we had challenges and all that, like we all do. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Would not change a thing. I'd change some of the approaches I took, I think, but I wouldn't change any decision I've made along the way. Just a really great community. Really great community.
And of course, during your time there, latter stages, it was the COVID pandemic, wasn't it? So did that change the way you thought about and approached your career and what you were going to do next?
It absolutely did. It absolutely did, Chris. We were a bit fortunate in rural and regional Victoria. We didn't have the restrictions, number one, that Melbourne had. And the Ring of Steel was just on the outskirts of Bacchus Marsh, so between Melton and Bacchus Marsh, when the Ring of Steel came in. But we were fortunate that I basically stayed in the office the whole time, because we were able to socially isolate, all that type of stuff, which was good. But council meetings went online. Coffees with the mayor were sitting socially apart, but we could still get a coffee and everything in regional Victoria. But then we started to think, Vicky and I started to think about, well, what's going to be next from this? So it wasn't the one that pushed out of local government, but we said, is it time to start looking at what takes us back closer to Bacchus Marsh? We'd spent some time with Vicky's family and her mum and everyone, so it helped the decision-making process. I think it wasn't it, but it certainly helped it. And I left a great crew up there. I was very proud of the work that we all did up there. And then, of course, came down into Department of Transport and Planning. Well, it was Department of Transport, then Regional Roads Victoria, and that was basically to get me closer to Bacchus Marsh, operating out of Geelong and Warrnambool. So I had the best of both worlds. I had still the link to the southwest, but then being able to move back to Bacchus Marsh.
So while you were doing those state government roles, there must have been a pullback to local government, because pretty much everything you've done since has been at a council, mostly in that part of the state.
It has been, Chris, yeah. And I feel really blessed. Every role that I've had, and no doubt we'll touch on a couple of them, but I've been approached by the council. So that's quite, it's quite emotional sometimes when you get a phone call from a mayor to say, are you available and would you like to? And you feel a bit chuffed about it all. And I just think I can make a contribution. So, yeah, I was down at Regional Roads. Again, a great crew. Anyone who deals with roads knows the challenges that we have with them and the funding and whatever and the bureaucracy. But again, I had some really good local government colleagues in there. Michael Bailey, who's ex-CEO of Northern Grampians, who's now an executive director there. Alex Green, who was down at Mansfield. But then the secretary was Paul Eunice, ex-CEO of local government and Coringamite Local, and Nick Fower.
Yeah.
Ex-CEO in local government as well. So we had a bit of a club of ex-local government people. And interestingly, why they were all attracted and recruited into DOT at the time was for their engagement skills. So working with communities, working with local councils, which is something Regional Roads particularly lacked for such a time. So it was a means to an end. I was there for about 20 months or so, but it got me back down this end And then out of the blue, I get a phone call from Councillor Ruth Castrain, who was the mayor of Corangamite at the time. Long-term CEO Andrew Mason had accepted a role at Warrnambool, where he still is, and they were looking for an interim. And I said, this is what I'm going to do next. I reckon this is going to be a cracker. And 5 councils later, I'm still going.
Yeah, so that was the start of the interim career that keeps your phone ringing. So Corangamite, Hindmarsh, Moira. Let's talk a bit about Moira, because that was a pretty interesting time to come into the role, given the Commission of Inquiry had just been completed and there were administrators in place. Did you think twice about that one?
No, I didn't actually. I received the phone call from John Tanner at the time, who was the chair administrator, and you know John really well.
And now a monitor at Hobson's Bay.
Now a monitor at Hobson's Bay, and I'm actually catching up with John for a coffee in the next couple of weeks, as we haven't seen for a while. But they'd also just appointed 2 others, which was Susanna Sheed, the ex-independent from up that way, and of course Graham Emerson, no stranger to local government. Yeah. And John spoke to me about the challenges and what they were up to and what they'd been through. I'd read the report, but didn't know a lot more about Moira, except beautiful part of the world, Cobram and Yarrawonga, and so I was walking out the door of Hindmarsh. Greg Wood had just finished up as the CEO. I was looking forward to travelling back home and see what would be up next. And John rang me, and next thing you know, I'm in a house up at Cobram and there. But some real challenges up there, and again, really proud of the team, Chris, of what we were able to achieve in a pretty broken organisation with what had gone on. You know, not the least of which was a tragic murder that occurred between two staff members. But and whilst that's terrible, and I feel so much for all families involved with that, the fallout and the other stuff that happened in that organisation leading up to that, then the Commission of Inquiry, as you said, the report, which was pretty damning of CEOs and others, I felt quite a weight going into that to say, well, we've got to try and repair whilst they're recruiting for a new CEO, which I think they've done an amazing job with Matthew Morgan starting up there in the January. I started there about the September or so, and in the January Matthew started. But we had to rebuild an organisation, but we also had to rebuild community trust in the organisation. So engaging with the community, engaging with the media, local MPs, anyone and everyone who I could. And it's a bit like all care, no responsibility. And I do say that I'm there for a good time, not a long time, but it does give you an opportunity with no baggage coming in of projects or work that you can have a fresh look at things. And I think we did some really good things at Moira, and I hope I know they're better off for how it's transitioned now, and they'll continue to grow as an organisation. And again, under Matthew's leadership, I think they're doing a great job. I'd have to say with administrators is the right call for that place for now, and particularly for the whole full year term. It gives them a good opportunity. They're running leadership programs up there at the moment for the community and for the organisation. Get the organisation recruited, get it stable, and then return to elected members post 2028.
Same model that's been used at Casey and Whittlesea and others, of course, in the more recent past. So from Moira, any reflections on Golden Plains before we get to the one you've just finished?
Yeah. Golden Plains was great. Again, got a message from Eric that he was toddling off to Wyndham for a director role there, get a bit closer to home. And Wyndham doing amazing stuff with the crew that are there, Steve and Liana and the others that are there. Again, so it was in a good state. Eric had been there for maybe 5 or 6, I think. So stable. It is disruptive when a CEO moves on from an organisation, though, regardless of good, bad or indifferent. And so there was a lot of change happening in the organisation. We had elections coming up the following year, which a bit's transpired there since I finished. And again, much smaller organisation than some, but talk about great service delivery to the community, and still got great relationships with staff that are there. Ran into the engineering manager, Vicky, the other day at a peer event, and the directors, and now they're on the lookout for another CEO. Unfortunately, Shane Walden, director from Macedon Rangers, didn't work out, so finished within his probation at his choice. So good on him for obviously deciding that something wasn't for him at the time. So Steve Sagona in there at the moment, and they're recruiting, which is good, and I'm sure it'll be well sought after. It's an interesting spot, Chris, geographically, but also the pool that you do get because the main centre's in Bannockburn, which is just, if you're a decent kick, which I'm not, you could get that from Cardinia Park in Geelong.
Yeah.
But also you've got the groups in Ballarat, so two really strong ends of the region that you can influence and work with. So the Greater Ballarat Alliance of Councils, GBAC, and then of course G21, which has gone through its own changes since. But an amazing group of CEOs and staff from around there. Martin Gill at Queenscliff, Ali Wasty at Geelong, Robin Seymour at Torquay, Surf Coast. Just an amazing group. Evan up in Ballarat. So really enjoyed my time there. And again, I think we were able to make a difference. Interestingly, at pretty much every role I've been in, I've had to recruit while I've been there as well, which is not always ideal to recruit, say, a director for an incoming CEO, but I think they've all worked out. Certainly Matthew, I had to recruit 2 for Moira because we just couldn't wait. But as soon as we knew Matthew was going to be in the chair, we involved him in the process. But I think Golden Plains will go really well. There's no doubt. They just need the right person. Probably maybe some experience there this time. If I was a betting person, that you should have someone who's got some runs on the board maybe as a CEO.
Yeah. All right. We're awaiting the outcome of that. And I want to come back to that current state of CEO appointments before we wrap up. But there's one more that you've just wrapped up, and that is Darebin. This is your first Metro Council as a CEO, isn't it? What were your thoughts about taking on a role of that size?
Yeah, well, it was a bit scary, I'd have to say. Yeah, first Metro, as you say, and, went from the manager at Melton, which was a growing council at the time. I still say, even though we changed our name to a city, we were still a shire at Melton, really. Went up to lovely Southern Grampians, and then after these roles, the good thing, and what I've experienced in the 5 that I've done now, you don't have to learn local government. So that's a real key. So when we use all of our jargon, when there's a network of like the M9, the Metropolitan 9s, or the Northern Alliance of Councils, and I knew all the CEOs, which is very helpful, of the neighbouring councils. So you don't have to learn about local laws. You don't have to learn about compliance and planning and stat and strategic and whatever. But you do have to get across the organisation. And I came in, so the previous council appointed me as the interim just before caretaker. Then we had the caretaker period. So whilst we had a couple of council meetings, there were no real decisions made, annual report, etc. Then the onboarding of a new council, elections, onboarding of a new council, the new mandatory training, everything that came with that. 1,300 staff, $220 million budget, very different to anywhere I'd been before. But what I decided, Chris, I said, well, I need to take the same approach. I need to get out and about. So the first thing I did, out to the depot, of course, was the first place you go to get a sense of the organisation, go out to the ops centre, see how things are travelling there. Darebin still do their own waste services, so we still have our own garbage trucks and all that type of stuff, to the libraries, to the maternal child health centres, to the community centres, just to get a feel for the staff. And again, instability with maybe 4 CEOs over 6 or 7 years. And the most recent one, Peter Smith, there for a couple of years, had put in a lot of change. And I think, they'd gone through a lot of change in that organisation, and they were at the sharp end of that. So it was incumbent upon me to respect what had been put in place by the executive. So we've done all of that. All of that's been implemented. Now the exec are working on any refinements they'd like to do. Onboarding a new council, 7 out of 9 new ones. Then the tragic passing of Gaetano Greco, long-served councillor, earlier this year. So lots of dynamics going on. But I thought, should I do it? And I got a phone call from a councillor about it, went through the process, of course, and was successful and thoroughly enjoyed it. It was probably longer than I thought, 9 months. So it's a long stint. But I think, again, we did really good stuff to onboard a new council. There'll be a by-election, unfortunately, due to Gaetano's passing on the 2nd of August. But we were able to get a budget. My very last meeting, the 30th of June, and then I finished on the 1st of July. Council adopted a budget and a council plan. So for Anne Howard, the incoming, who's commenced now, I think she's got a really good platform to spring from. into the future. But yeah, it was a little bit scary to start with, but so welcoming. And you know what local government staff are like. They're just amazing people.
Yes.
And the council were great. And the Mayor, Christine O'Laris, first-time councillor, first-time mayor, just had a really strong, close relationship professionally. She was always after ideas and support and advice and everything. And I guess I was in a fortunate position to be able to give as much as I could.
You make a good point, though. The framework in which you operate as a council CEO in the state of Victoria is the same wherever you go. But there are differences from one council to another, from regional and rural to metro. And as you point out, Darebin's still directly involved in waste services. So there's quite a bit of nuance to come up to speed with when you're only in a role for a short period of time, isn't there?
Oh, the learning curve is very steep. And, you know, I was very upfront with all of the staff about my first metro. And, you know, whilst I've been around a little while, I still had a lot to learn, and I learned a lot from Darebin, from the staff, from the council, from everything. To get up to speed with those services, you know, most of us provide somewhere between 75 and 140 different services. We had another lot again at Darebin, and making sure we were delivering the best service that we possibly could, the best bang for our buck, you know, and spending ratepayers' money as responsibly as possible. And it's you know, it's a difficult balance, and this council had to go through that with the budget that they've just adopted. You know, fortunately they stayed within the funding envelopes that the organisation had put together, so there were no random $500,000 or $1 million projects that came on budget night. But to learn all those nuances and the staff and get to know the staff, clearly the executive to start with, the senior leaders. I think we had something like 65 vacancies when I first got there, Chris, in September of last year, and something like 60 or 70 acting positions.
Wow.
By the time we'd finished, and no thanks to me, all senior leadership roles, all exec, I had to recruit one general manager while I was there, so one who'd moved on, and the senior leaders, so the manager level, all stable now. So I think, you know, it's in a really good spot, as I mentioned, for Anne taking over now, a really good platform to leverage off. And I know Anne will put her own mark on it. She's really excited about it. She's had a good break from Colac Otway before she started this one. But yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it. And I just think it's just another learning experience for myself.
So are there more interim CEO engagements in your future, do you think?
Potentially. I've never planned any of them. They've just come. It has been 2.5 years and I haven't had a break in between gigs. Keeping my hand in with VLGA and LG Pro and the others, you know, organisations that I've had a lot to do with over the years. So I don't think I'll be out of work, but I'm also happy not to have a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. Not that a CEO gig's 9 to 5 Monday to Friday.
No, it's longer than that.
Full-time hours for the next little while.
Well, I asked the question because at this moment in time, we've had, I think it's 10 CEO appointments that weren't reappointments just since the start of the year. There's another 6 that are yet to be determined. You do the math, 20% of councils changing over in less than a 12-month period. That feels like an extraordinary level of instability, and it would suggest more opportunity for those like you who might be needed to plug gaps.
Yeah, and very happy to, you know, where the council think I can, you know, add value. It is handy. Like I am a big supporter of people acting from within to give them opportunities and everything. But when a CEO leaves, particularly, sometimes it's a little bit awkward. And I've said this to directors many times over the years, Chris. You might think it's a good thing that you're the acting, you're in the role, you might be a shoo-in. The council will also get to see you in action as well, and you get to try before you buy, if you like. And it's not always successful where an acting from within gets the gig. Then what do you do with that? So interims have become a little bit more commonplace. And I was reading something about the options for interims, whether it's someone from external totally, someone from internal, or someone who's been in local government before, like myself, who can sort of come in and hit the ground running. I think there'll be more opportunities for that. It'd be good to grow the pool that's out there a bit, because I guess you get good ones. And I think of the Bill Millards of the world, Peter Browns of the world, Mark Dupay, who's just recently finished at his role. There's a few that have finished up. Phil down in Frankston. So hopefully those people would be really nice if they've still got a passion for the sector, maybe don't want another 5-year contract, which was me. Here is a way that you can still contribute. You can walk in and pretty much hit the ground running, knowing the stuff. So it'd be good to grow the pool. But as I said to the Darebin crew, Chris, you never know where I'll pop up next. So
Indeed.
I'm sure I'll see you around somewhere.
So that level of instability at the CEO level that I talked about, I wanted to get your thoughts on whether that's an issue that we should be concerned about, or is it just part of the cycle of these things?
I think it's a bit of both, but I think it's mostly the cycle. It's been a bigger number, but I've been fortunate enough to know most of the ones that have moved on. You look at Karen Ellis, for example, from Gippy, who went to the Ombudsman's office and all that. So there were opportunities that they took, and good on them for doing that. And with that, it creates opportunities in the sector as well. You look at some of the amazing people, and particularly from within the sector, that have now picked up CEO gigs. I think of Gail Gatt up in Horsham. It won't be without its challenges up there, but I was talking to Gail. I think it's an amazing appointment for someone like that. Mark Everstein down in Moyne, who came from outside the sector, in logistics, someone who's been given an opportunity, seems to be throwing himself right and seems to be going really well, because it's not the easiest gig to get into. You think you've got this board that you're working to, and we know that councils can be very different to boards. So I think it's a bit of both. I remember Bruce Anson said, former CEO of Warrnambool, quite some time ago, we're down at an LG Pro session in Melbourne. You were probably there, I suspect. And I think we had about 13 or 14% vacancies at that point in time, and we'd had a fair turnover then, and quite a few of those for retirement. So I think it's part of the cycle. I think it does create opportunities. The unfortunate bit that those where it does go belly up a little bit seems to be unfortunately related to our elected members and some of the things that have gone on there, either behaviours or whatever. And I'm not pointing the finger at anyone. Many of them are well documented, and I wouldn't suggest by any stretch of the imagination that CEOs are perfect either. There's been CEOs mentioned in dispatches over the years as well. But I think we need to, with some of the stuff that's been done with legislation and mandatory training, I think there's still another step to go, and some of that's in train and some of it's not with our elected members, because CEOs are quite vulnerable individuals, as you well know. And I'm not crying for CEOs at all, but it is a pretty lonely job up at the top. And who do you speak to? Generally your colleagues that you have around the place, which are a great sounding board. But mostly the cycle, I think, creates a great deal of opportunity for up-and-comers though.
So local government's still a good career path for people just setting out in their careers?
100%. I couldn't speak highly enough of the sector, Chris. Yes, it has its challenges. We talk often about the level of government closest to the people, but we are physically, and the services that we provide. And you get to see, and particularly in the CEO gig, you get to see the outcomes of what your teams have done. Not what you've done, but what your teams have done. And generally it's within your time. Poor councillors, they'll do big strategies and all that type of stuff, and they often don't get to see the stuff in their term. It happens in another term. You're generally pretty fortunate in the CEO gig. You get to see people develop, you get to see councillors develop, and you get to see communities develop with some of the stuff we're able to enable within those communities. So an amazing gig, and it can take you anywhere. Here was a bloke who started in the Melton Regional Shopping Centre CBC Bank, which is now Woodgrove Shopping Centre. Like it's massive, and ended up as a CEO in local government. A bit of a dream run, really.
Good note to end on, Michael. Thank you. It's been great to chat with you. Really appreciate you sharing your journey with us on the Well Travelled Executive Series, and I look forward to hearing about what's next for you.
Good on you, Chris. Thank you, and keep up the great work. As I've said to you offline, I love listening to the podcasts and everything. It gives us a snapshot of the sector, and particularly when I was travelling down Bell Street, Preston and Coburg every day for 9 months, that kept me sane, I've got to say. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Very kind words, and all the very best to you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Chris.
And thank you for joining us on this episode of the Well-Travelled Executive Series from the Local Government News Roundup, brought to you by the Victorian Local Governance Association. We hope you enjoyed hearing Michael Tudball's inspiring journey through local government. His dedication to community and leadership offers valuable insights for anyone passionate about public service. Stay tuned for more episodes featuring leaders who are making a difference. Until next time, thanks for listening and bye for now. Local government teams shouldn't have to waste time on manual data entry into outdated systems. With Symphony 3 Smart Glue, you don't have to. You can automate repetitive tasks, eliminate double handling, and connect legacy systems with ease. Smart Glue helps councils streamline operations, reduce errors, and deliver better services without replacing your existing systems. It's time to build smarter, more connected local governments. Learn more at www.symphony3.com. Symphony 3, supporters of the Local Government News Roundup.